Welcome to Business is Good, the podcast all about what it means to be in business in the 21st century. Small and medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood of the UK economy, and globally they can and will have a huge impact on society, the economy and how we live our lives. From technology disruption to reworking a solution to solve the world's biggest problem, Business is Good is a podcast about what it takes to be successful and how every business defines that in different ways. Business is no longer just about being defined by what you do, but it's about giving back and redefining the problems and how we solve them in a way that works for you. I'm your host, Caroline Sumners, and I'll be giving you weekly inspirational stories from business owners who are building business and solving problems.
I'm Chris Blackwell. I'm the CEO and founder of Purpose-Led Performance. We provide consultancy and leadership development for purpose-driven organizations and organizations that want to grow quickly. My background, I guess I'm best known for running businesses for the likes of Deloitte, Capita, Maximus, organizations that delivered services either to government or on behalf of government. And the businesses that I ran became number one in their markets and were recognised on 7 different occasions as being amongst the top 100 companies to work for in the UK.
Oh, wow.
And I guess as Purpose-Led Performance, currently working with 10 senior leaders from a range of organisations across the private and voluntary sector. And the focus really is supporting and developing the performance of their organizations and their growth capabilities by putting purpose at the heart of their businesses. And my big vision, ultimately, is I think as we move into the 2020s, all businesses and all organizations, so whether that's private, public or voluntary, need to wake up to the fact that actually being purpose-driven will help you grow sustainably, it will engage your staff, and it will make you a higher performing business. And I think organizations that don't wake up to that are not going to do as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, by the way, about purpose-led. And actually, one of the reasons I started the podcast was because I wanted to bring that conversation about being purpose-led into the realms of smaller business, that it isn't just for big companies with big budgets and all of that. Yeah. Now, of course, you're working with probably larger organizations, but I think I agree with you that businesses, however big or small, they need to be thinking about what their deeper purpose is, yes, and how it affects recruitment, how it affects their customers, and ultimately will affect their long-term success. And we can all do little things in little ways, I think, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. So what got you into thinking, okay, I'm going to start a purpose-led business? I mean, obviously you're passionate about it, but was it like a long period of thinking about it, or was it just like, okay, this is something that really needs to happen?
So really, I guess it comes from my career history. So I spent close to 14 years working in 2 organizations that were purpose-driven. And I think because they were purpose-driven, were incredibly successful. And that goes back to, I started with one back in 2003. And it wasn't until I actually left the second of those organizations and moved into a new job that I realized that wasn't the norm. And it's taken, over the last 4 years, I've worked in 2 organizations that weren't purpose-driven, big organizations who ostensibly are quite successful on the surface. And I found it wasn't that actually, it was that their lack of purpose was immediately apparent. Actually, it was much more practical things. There was more infighting. There was less accountability for people within the business. People were less engaged. The financial performance of those businesses was worse. The way they dealt with their customers was very short-termist. And so I've had a journey over the last 4 years of experiencing this. And I guess one day I woke up and thought, what I experienced over the early part of my career is not the norm. This is the norm. And this is really dysfunctional. It's bad for the customers. It's bad for the employees. It's bad for the organizations themselves. And I think I've got a few thoughts on practically what organizations can do to be better. And it is round about putting purpose at the heart of their organization. So I've been on a little bit of a journey, and it really took experiencing things happening badly to reflect on the positive experiences that I'd had and what had made them exceptional.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So do you find that, so how long have you been running it's purpose-led performance, your business? But how long have you been doing that?
Since April.
I think it's relatively new, right?
It is, yeah, 6 months.
So what have you found as you're having the conversations around purpose-led businesses? Have you found that an easy conversation to have, getting easier, or are people just like looking at you as if you've gone slightly crazy?
I think with the clients, I think the hook actually is, so I think when you speak to people sort of say, well, that would be nice. That would be nice to have. And the hooks often are not necessarily, we'd like to be purpose driven, but we don't have time, or, we don't have the big budgets behind us, or it's just not practical. And actually the hooks for me is sort of saying, well, what do you want to achieve with your organization? What are your focuses? And then turning the conversation to actually the solution to a lot of your issues is getting clearer about your purpose. And so it's a very practical conversation. And I guess I come from an angle where, purpose shouldn't be esoteric. It's relevant to everyone. It shouldn't be theoretical. It's incredibly practical. And it's not a nice to have. For me, it's essential. A lot of people see big organizations talking about purpose and they think it's about PR, or they think it's about recruiting Gen Z. And they sort of think it's not really relevant to my everyday business issues, which are critical now. And actually where the hook is sort of, it's more in asking the questions and helping people to understand where some of their issues are, and actually how getting back to basics. And so for me, I always start is what's the definition of purpose? And purpose is the reason that you exist. And so for an organization, what I would observe is many organizations have either forgotten that or lost sight of it, or it may never have even existed. And so where the hook really is more sort of talking about this isn't some esoteric, and this isn't about PR. This is just about how to make your business run more successfully, have more engaged staff and happier customers, and ultimately to achieve, successful business metrics. So high performance, high growth, high quality.
Yeah. So I think you're totally right. I think it's so easy to lose sight, especially if your business has been going a number of years.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to lose sight of your purpose, isn't it? Because you get caught up in the day-to-day of paying the bills and, whether you've got staff or all sorts of things. So I think it is really easy to lose sight of it. And I think the fact that you're saying everything starts from that, I think it's just such a helpful lesson to us all. I guess something that, I don't know if you find this, do you find that some people sort of do you think there's a problem that some business, maybe bigger businesses, are kind of trying to do it as a PR stunt though, and there isn't that actual deep-seated work behind it, but it's like, there's a strong environmental message, so we need to do something about that. Do you think that there's a bit of a shift towards that? And how do we stop that from happening so it doesn't kind of get whitewashed and we don't get to the heart of it?
It's a really good question, and it's something that I've kind of thought about. is it a bad thing that bigger organizations are on the surface starting to talk about purpose and social impact? I think on balance, probably not, because I think it's getting it out there. They've got big platforms and big voices. For me, are they going to get the impact that they want at a deep level within the organization? I'm not sure, because I think part of, if you're going to be purpose driven, it's about being authentic. So what really matters to you? So why do you exist, and why does it matter? So if an organization exists to do one thing, and then they start to talk about something as being really important, which is, directly contradictory, then I think people will see through it. Customers will see through it. Their staff will see through it. They won't get the traction that comes with that. But I think generally, I think it's a positive trend. And I think, your point earlier about smaller organizations, I actually think it's easier for smaller organizations and to be clearer about what they're about. And that's, that's really what purpose driven should be, is about, at the heart of it, having clarity about why you exist. And then, from that then, I always talk about being purpose driven provides three things. It provides clarity, so you know what you're there to do. It provides alignment throughout your organization. And then it can provide motivation. So if you recruit people that align with your purpose, and they buy into it because you're really clear about it, then actually that's what really sparks kind of high performance and growth. Because people, there's lots of stats out there about, I think something ridiculous, like 15% of people or 20% of people are actually satisfied at work.
I know, it's depressingly low, isn't it?
It is depressingly low. And I think it's a great failing both for individuals and for organizations, because what a waste. How much time do we spend at work? And actually, and I guess my background is from running bigger organizations with lots of people. It makes such a difference when people are motivated, when they believe in what you're doing, they believe in both the purpose, but they believe then in the goals that relate to that purpose, then you get amazing results. And, if 80% of people or 85% of people are disaffected at work, then, no wonder we've got a productivity problem.
Yes, precisely. So is there, obviously, you work with organizations on a sort of like long-term program, or I guess how many on a program, but is there some simple steps that you think that businesses could sort of start to think about? If someone's listening and think, I really want to go, this sounds really something that I want to do. Is there some simple steps that they should start with, and how should someone go about redefining their purpose?
There's some really practical stuff that you can do. And I guess the first thing we would say with those practical steps is, don't lock yourself in a room by yourself or just do it as a senior leader. Actually, it's really useful, no matter the size of the organization. Have it as a conversation with the people within your organization. And some very practical things you can do in sessions, in team meetings or whatever. So the first thing is asking people to reflect. What is the reason for our organization's existence? And that can sound a little bit esoteric, but what are we here to do? Who are our customers, and what do we do for them? What are we serving them with? I think the other, a very practical question and exercise that you can do as well with people is, again, doing this with teams of people, asking them the question, when do you feel proudest at work? And when are we as an organization? And when are you within your role? When do you think we're doing our best? Because often there's a really strong alignment there to what the purpose of the organization is.
I love that. That's really good thing to ask.
Yeah, and it's actually very motivating for people, because what you tend to find is, and again, going back to that statistic of 80% of people or what, being dissatisfied at work, in every organization, there are moments within the week when people get lit up because they're doing a good job. for their customers. They're doing what they're there to do. And the problem is those moments are too few and far between. It's a really good starting point to get people to reflect on that, because actually then that helps people to start to distill, all right, so why is that good? Why are we doing our best in that moment? Why did we feel good about it? Why are we making our customers happy about it? And then you can kind of ask the reverse question, so either you could ask, well, why are we not having more of that? Or when are the occasions that we feel that we're not doing what we should be doing, or we feel that we're not doing a great job, or we feel that we're not doing great by our customers? Because that brings into sharp focus, and particularly if you're the person who leads the organization and the team, it really brings into sharp focus for you. Okay, when are we doing good? When are we not doing so good? And what is that balance? And typically that balance is, a few bright moments and a lot of, we're not really doing what we should be doing, or we're not being true to who we are.
Yeah. So do you find that doing that exercise, that helps businesses, well, not only redefine their purpose, but to a degree redefines services and products and whatever it is that they actually do as a business? Have you seen that happen? That they've thought, right, well, we're not doing good we're not doing the best that we can do when we do then. So why are we even doing that? And what purpose does it serve within the business? Does it lead on to those kind of discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the time. So we have a 5-step model for long-term business success that we use with our clients. And so we say that the foundations are purpose, culture, and people. And the three are interrelated but not the same. So we would always say you start with purpose first. Be clear about the reason for your organization's existence and what that means. What do you do? Who are your customers? Who you're serving? Then your people, we would always recommend that actually recruit people who align with your purpose. Who share the value set, who want to make that happen. And it can be quite pragmatic. I mean, if you're a bike maker and your purpose is making the best bikes in the world to ride, then recruit people who really, that's what they're passionate about. And that helps create the culture. So that kind of sits at the heart, and we call that the foundation. But then that should influence everything that you do in your organization. And so we talk to organizations about how to be successful. And so actually your first step is your strategy, and your strategy should be informed by your purpose. And so actually once you're clear on your purpose, then either review your strategy or restart your strategy. And again, in the absence of clarity about purpose, what you find is organizations tend to start to do stuff that really doesn't align with their purpose. And this isn't just about for-profit organizations. You see this a lot in the voluntary sector as well.
Oh, okay.
So
you would think that. You'd think they were so focused on their purpose that wouldn't happen, but...
Yeah, I actually think you would. I think the natural assumption is the voluntary sector have got it nailed in terms of purpose.
Yeah.
But actually, in the same way as within, private businesses, for-profit businesses, the focus gets very much caught up on the day-to-day. Within the voluntary sector, funding is king. And, it's a very tough environment out there for charities at the moment. It's tough for fundraising. It's tough for those that deliver services to government. And so what you often find is there is kind of a drift that happens. So it's not something that happens overnight, but, an organization thinks, well, this has come along. It's kind of similar to what we do. Let's do this. And then the next thing comes along, which is similar to the thing they've just started to do, which is a step away from what they were really there to do. And then over time, they just slowly drift and they end up doing something that is either completely separate from their purpose, or often it's just expedience. It's losing this money over here. We need to replace it with some money over here. So no matter, both voluntary sector and public sector, intuitively people think, those organizations are almost by definition purpose driven. But actually, equally so as private and for-profit businesses, they equally get the benefit from rediscovering what their purpose is and what that means.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Regular listeners to the podcast will know that I have a miniature schnauzer. This is related to what you're talking about.
Yep.
And I fundraise for what is going to be, they're just registered as a charity. It's called Schnauzer Fest. And we had a previous guest on who does fundraising for them as well.
Yeah.
But what you were talking about with coming back to purpose is this charity, they're just in the process of registering as a charity. It just started as a fundraising thing about 5 years ago. And they're at about, I think, over £250,000 raised in 5 years from basically hosting, it's more than dog walks, but the whole purpose is around supporting dogs and a particular rescue of dogs that come out of puppy farms. So it's all about educating on puppy farms. And the lady that started the charity is a lady called Janetta Harvey. And she talks all the time about staying true to what Schnauzer Fest is about, what their purpose is about, because she gets asked all the time to do, what about this, what about that? And it's congruent, but it's not what it's about. And for me, she's someone that says all the time, no, our purpose is this.
Yeah.
We must stick to this. And I think it's really hard to do, like you say.
It is really hard to do.
Because you get caught up in, oh, yes, that could work. And so that's a really difficult thing to maintain. And to be honest, also as a private business, I had a bit of a situation last year where, I probably did almost do that. What do I love doing? And what am I best doing? And what am I not at my best doing? And it basically ended up in a situation where earlier this year, I pretty much fired all my clients because I had so drifted so far from what I had originally intended my business to be that I was miserable.
Yeah.
And I just thought, if you're going to go into this world of entrepreneurship and being self-employed, you've got to enjoy it, right?
Yeah,
otherwise,
absolutely.
I'm part of that 20%, and I'm working for myself. So
you can't even blame the boss.
No. So what's that all about? But it is really hard because you have to make some tough decisions.
Yeah.
So, but I think a lot of it is, like you say, about being really truthful. And I think sometimes that's the hard part, isn't it?
Yeah.
About doing that truthful piece.
Yeah. And that's why actually it's a very practical thing to do, because if you talk about it and it becomes the foundation of your organization, then what it does is it gives you something always to reference back to. Because I think that's the issue, is that lots of organizations, like virtually all organizations, are purpose-driven at inception, but very few talk about it explicitly. And it's the absence of it being explicitly talked about within your organization that allows things to drift. And so, again, very practically, once you have a purpose, then you should talk about it all the time. And it should permeate through everything that exists within your organization, because actually you've got to constantly refresh and remember what it is that you're there to do. And, having a clear language that everybody speaks, and as organizations been doing this for years and years and years, long before it's become kind of the zeitgeist like it is now. It's just that clarity, make it explicit, create a language about it, refer everything back to it, make sure that it runs through your organization. So, then it's reflected in your strategy, it's reflected in your business plans, it's reflected in your performance systems, it's reflected in the things that you value and reward within your organization. Then you're constantly reminding, no matter how small or big you are as an organization, it's a constant reminder, this is what we're here to do. And it kind of really does then act as a guiding principle for how you run the business.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. I won't ask for bad examples of people not doing it because we don't want to name and shame. But have you got any examples of companies that, people might know that are doing a really good job of being purpose-led? Who you admire as well? maybe?
Yeah, so there's I'll give an example. Actually, as somebody that lots of people won't know, but they're doing lots of work to educate and promote for roundabout organisations that are doing this. So I don't know if you've come across a company called the Corporate Rebels.
I have not, but I'm intrigued, and I will be looking them up immediately.
I think they're Dutch originally. They're Dutch or Scandinavian, but they're a couple of guys who did corporate jobs and then decided to rebel. Hence the phrase "corporate rebels." And they're on a mission to go out and visit organisations that are doing it the right way, and so they do features on all of these amazing organisations who are purpose driven. And they're pretty radical. So it's not just that they have I think it's an 8-step sort of manifesto, and being purpose driven is number one. But they're all about, for example, companies being self-managed, kind of getting rid of years of management. And so some stuff's quite radical and far out. And, having led organizations, I read stuff and I'm intrigued by it, but I'm not sure I'd have the bravery to do the full they do. But they talk a lot about a lot of the brands who are doing it really, really well. For me, my personal example, and again, it's not an organization that many will know much about, but actually it's the organization that I worked for 10 years is a really good example of a purpose-driven organization and how it can be so powerful. So if it's okay with you, maybe I'll just share a few details of that.
Yeah, of course.
There's a company called Ingeus, and they were originally an Australian company. They were set up by a lady called Therese Rain back in 1989. And they originally started off, it was just her, and she had a little office above a shoe shop in Brisbane in Australia. And her background, psychologist, and she was supporting people to go back to work after injuries and was focused on their rehabilitation. And I met Therese in 2002. I started work for her company. They'd just moved into the UK. I got a frontline employment advisor role. And then I worked there for 10 years and ended up being the deputy chief exec of the UK business. But Therese's story was really interesting because she was inspired to do what she did, and she started the business because of her father and the experiences that he'd had. So he'd been a pilot in the Second World War. His plane had crashed, and he'd ended up in a wheelchair. He'd come back to Australia. He was a young man. Come back to Australia after the war, and was pretty much told, "Okay, that's it. Your life's over. You're not going to get a job. You can't go to university. Just take your disability pension, and that's it." And that's that was for people with disabilities. That's kind of how things were in the late 40s, early 50s. Not just the rest of the world, but he didn't stand for that. He didn't accept that, and he ended up going to university to study as an aeronautical engineer. Had to get carried to classes because the buildings weren't suitable for people. And so he was a really inspirational character, and it really had quite a big impact on Therese. And so when she started her business, she was very focused on actually everybody can work, and work's really important for people, and it, tied it back to her father's example. Ingeus grew to be, I think, globally delivering services in about 12 countries, the largest in the UK. They were at one point one of the largest in Australia, in France, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden. And actually, purpose was always at the heart of it, because as an organization, Ingeus was there to help people get jobs and to help those who other people thought couldn't work, to help those people get jobs. And it ran right through the organisation, right from being a single woman operation above a shoe shop in Brisbane to being a multinational in 10 plus countries, hundreds of millions of pounds or dollars revenue, but it was always true to that purpose. And that was what really fired the performance and the growth of the organisation, and it made it a really special place to work. And so, and again, I just thought that was normal. My first proper grown-up job.
Yeah, no.
There, and I spent 10 years there, and it's almost cult-like when you work at a place like that, because it's so powerful. Everybody believes in it, and not cult-like in a bad way, but in the true meaning of cult-like. Actually, everybody really buys in, and there's a very shared vision, shared values, shared alignment, and everybody was just so passionate about working there. And again, so it's probably not a well-known, because what they did was relatively niche. So although on the, they
no, but it's a good example, I think, and gives people kind of like an idea of the types of things, types of companies to look at. And I like the example of Corporate Rebels. I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, they're definitely worth checking out. And so, because they do a lot of the legwork of doing all, showcasing a lot of the fantastic stuff that's out there.
That's brilliant. So I've got one final question. At the beginning, you said that you believe that, like, as we go into the 2020s, it's going to be sort of pretty much the businesses that are successful will be those that are purpose-led. Why do you think that's so important? Aside from the fact that we're living in a different environment now where it is about purpose, but particularly, why do you think that someone should care about it beyond what you've already told them, really?
For me, I kind of bring it back to being quite practical. So my view is, when you look at really high performing organizations historically, when you scratch underneath the surface, then actually historically very high performing organizations are purpose driven. They do have clarity, they've got alignment, they've got passion amongst their workforce. The reason I think it's going to get even increasingly important, particularly for existing established businesses. So my emerging view is that a lot of organizations have continued to do okay, even though they're not purpose driven, is because there have been barriers to entry to competitors coming in to compete against them. Because typically established organizations, they're known, or historically at least they've been known. They've had access to money to do expensive things like develop websites and invest in marketing and all of these different things. But actually what's happening as technology changes and moves on, the barriers to entry to new organizations are lowering. And so actually, 10 years ago, I remember we got a website developed and it cost us, hundreds of thousands of pounds. But actually, you can stand up a really good website that looks as good as, one that 10 years ago was hundreds of thousands of pounds. For a couple of grand, you can get, CRM systems, which again used to cost you hundreds of thousands of pounds. You can get one for 50 quid a month. So actually, what I think is going to happen is there's just going to be a lot more competition, because the barriers to entry to markets are dropping. And also just the changing nature of the workforce. A lot more people are going independent, are becoming freelancers. And that used to be a barrier. You couldn't get access to talent because the talent was all tied up in the established organizations, but that's changing now. So actually those advantages are disappearing, and those new organizations coming in who are entering the market, if they're delivering a better service, if they're a better place to work for their workforce, and actually they're going to have lower overheads so they can do it more cost effectively, they're going to take the business from those established players. And so for me, it's a very practical consideration for organizations, which is the competition is going to get a lot tougher. And, if you don't have clarity about what you do, if you don't have alignment within your organization, and you don't have a passionate workforce who are focused on helping you achieve your goals, you're going to get overtaken.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with you. And I think even if you think of yourself as a consumer, right, you vote with your feet now.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If you get service that you don't particularly like, or there's something about the business that you don't particularly like, or you don't agree, with the way they're going about things, there's so much more choice that you can just go and find it with someone else that you do align with.
Yeah.
So, and you do that all the time. I mean, where I live in Portsmouth, we've got thankfully, we've got a lot of independent small businesses, coffee shops, things like that. We've also got a fantastic, lovely, shiny outlet shopping mall at Gunwharf Quays.
Yeah.
But none of that is independent businesses. And I make a point that, especially to come up to Christmas, you've got to go with those people that've got your shared beliefs and shared passion and so I think you've got so much choice that it's possible. So I think, there's this double edge, the barriers to entry plus the choice plus everything, I think is coming to this point. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And the other thing is when you get a bad thing now, it isn't just, if you have a bad experience, it's not just your circle of friends who gets to hear about that. You know, we're so much more interconnected these days, and people have got thousands of followers on Twitter and Facebook, and it just goes so rapidly around the world or around kind of consumer bases that organizations really do. You can't get away with being crap anymore. It's a bit of a rubbish way of saying it, but that is the genuine. I think that's where the world.
I think you're totally right, and that's probably a good place to end, because that's going to be the quote that makes the beginning. Yeah, you can't get away with being crap anymore, and you're totally right, because why are you going to give your money to someone? I mean, I have got my personal bank account with Monzo, and customer service, everything that they do is around their purpose of simplifying the whole sort of banking experience. And you've only got to see the phenomenal growth that they've had as to why people find that so compelling. So no business, you can't be crap anymore. End of story. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you, Chris. I really, really appreciate your time.
That's okay. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Subject, and thank you very much.
I loved talking to Chris, as you could probably tell, and I think some of those ideas that he had, just those really simple questions about how to find your purpose if you're struggling, around when are you at your best or when are we not at our best, are two of the most important and simple questions I think we can all ask. And for sure, as I said to Chris in the interview, I definitely found myself doing that earlier this year. So I can speak from experience in that is definitely some hard but really important questions to ask yourself. So that's actually going to be the last episode of this series. I almost said season, and then it was like, no, it's series. I'm English. So that this episode with Chris is going to be the last episode of this series. Going to be back in the new year. And whilst this year this series, I focused on stories of modern business in this Business for Good podcast. Next series, we're going to talk about how to build a modern business. So we're going to have all sorts of tips and information, and speak to loads of different people in different sectors about tools, techniques, resources, and ways to think about promoting, building and growing your business. So I'm going to do a wrap-up episode in the next week or so of this series. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in this series, and see you in 2020.